passage with three questions. We'll quickly read the passage, summarize it before we look at the questions. In the early 16th century, it was common to have lawsuits filed with animals as defendants. They had lawsuits and they had animals as defendants. All right. Dismissing animal trials is as just another backwards practice of a primitive time is to our intellectual detriment. He says, don't dismiss this. Really? Animals in a court, animals as defendant, don't dismiss it. That's what the author says. Because don't dismiss it as primitive because it is to our intellectual detriment. It will diminish your understanding. Not only because it imposes a pernicious presentism on the past, but because it's worth considering whether or not the broader implications of such a ritual don't have something to tell us about different ways of understanding non human consciousness. One, to dismiss it. Hey, how can you have an animal in court and have it as a defendant in a trial? Don't dismiss it. One, it will not improve your understanding of the situation. Second, pernicious means harmful. He calls it pernicious presentism. Presentism is where you evaluate everything in terms of what is present. At present, we don't have animals in court, but this kind of pernicious presentism, evaluating the past on the basis of what you believe is correct, is wrong. It's harmful. Also, because you need to consider the broader implications of maybe in the past they had a different way of understanding non-human consciousness. We look at animal consciousness in a different way. That's a non-human consciousness. But maybe the past people looked at it different, and you're ignoring the various differing ways, varying ways of looking at non-human consciousness. So, for all these reasons, you should not dismiss animals in courts as defendant. Do not dismiss it as a primitive factor. Different ways of understanding non-human consciousness and the rights that our fellow creatures deserve. See, in the present, we don't look at it in one way. Maybe in the past they had a different way of looking at human consciousness. They had a different way of looking at animal rights. From our metaphysics then comes our ethics, and from our ethics can derive politics and laws. So each is a derivative of the other. From metaphysics come your ethics, from your ethics come your politics and law. There need not be a return of animals to the stand as defendants. You don't have to go back to that. But they have already had legal representation as plaintiffs. They've had legal representation even now as plaintiffs. The Non-Human Rights Projects, led by the US Attorney Stephen Wise, has filed briefs on behalf of creatures such as 4 captive chimpanzees, Tommy, Kiko, Hercules, and Leo in New York in 2013. More recently, Happy the elephant, a solitary pachyderm at Bronx Zoo. So people have filed a case on behalf of animals, on behalf of chimpanzees, on behalf of elephants. So don't dismiss it. I mean, even in the present, we've done it. We need not actually take an animal to court as a defendant, but we've done it, right? We've also filed a case on behalf of animals. Because it's a phenomenon that's newly pertinent, so it's become relevant, it's become important, it's imperative, it's really urgent and important for us to think that the history of animal trials is in a more nuanced light, beyond the mocking tone in which it can sometimes be discussed. So he says, look at animal trials in a better light, in a different light, in a more nuanced light, rather than mocking them as what? Bring animals to court. Don't. Rather than looking at it mockingly, disdainfully, look at it in a different manner. Some may shrug dismissively, drawing from these peculiar events that conclusion that our pre-enlightenment relatives were fundamentally irrational, writes the Canadian lawyer Anila Srivastava. Yet she concludes that the trials demonstrated unexpected ways of thinking about who or what the law acts upon. She says in the present times, many regard these animal trials as something irrational. But another way of looking at it is think of the scope of law, the range of law. It tells you the unexpected ways of thinking about who or what the law acts upon. The law can be, you can use the law on anything and anybody. That's what it shows, according to her. Animal trials also provide an indication not just about unexpectedly expansive legal reasoning, not only the previous fact that she has mentioned, but a metaphysical position. It also shows a metaphysical position, a figurative position about the similarities between human and animal consciousness that is superior to the Cartesian position that reduced dogs, cats, pigs, and cows to intricate mechanisms. Goes beyond the physical, it goes to the metaphysical part. It need not be an actual fact, but there may be some similarities in our consciousness in a metaphysical way, instead of the Cartesian principle, which looks at animals in a purely mechanical way. In Disciple and Punish, Michael Foucault explains how pre modern legal proceedings were not necessarily intended to reduce crime or even to punish, but they are better understood as a political ritual. So, what does Foucault say? Look at pre-modern legal proceedings, whether it was animal trials or any other trials, not just as something that was given for crime or punishment. It had another purpose. What was that? It was a political ritual. As being among, how was it a political ritual? It was among the ceremonies by which power is manifested. In trying a group of rats for eating crops, there was never an assumption that the rodent will somehow learn their lesson, for the trial wasn't held for them, rather for the humans who witnessed the spectacle. So the trials were not meant to teach the rat a lesson, to decrease the crime, to teach a rat a lesson. They were meant for the humans who were witnessing the trial. Okay? Ironically, then, their exoneration as secured by the defense lawyer tells us something surprising about what the authorities believed concerning animal agency and interiority, consciousness, and personhood. So, these trials, okay, the defense lawyer exonerated, helped to uh, free those people of the accusation against them, but those arguments also told us something about animal agency, interiority, consciousness, and personhood. So these trials were not so much meant for the animals as for the people who were witnessing them. The defense, the way he used his arguments to exonerate his client, also tells us something more about how animals were used, how animal consciousness was used, how personhood and animals were viewed. This is the summary of the passage. Why does the author use the word ironically in the last sentence of the passage? Let's go back to the last sentence of the passage. Ironically, then, their exoneration as secured by the defense lawyer tells us something surprising about what authorities believed considering animal agencies, interiority, consciousness, and personhood. So the trials, the previous line he says, the trials weren't held for the animals. The trials were held for the human beings who were witnessing those trials. Ironically, while the trials were held on animals, the purpose was something different. It teaches us what the authorities thought about animals, believed about animals, their purpose, their personhood, and consciousness. Right? So, this is the literal interpretation. Let's look at the options. The rats were probably not even aware that they were tried, defended, and exonerated. There is no irony here. Obviously, they did not know. The trial intended by the authorities for the humans instead reveals their beliefs about animal agency and consciousness. Ironically, the trials showed us what the authorities believed about animal agency, animal consciousness, animal personhood. So the trials were intended for humans, correct? Humans, the trials were not conducted for the animals, right? The rat was not to be punished or exonerated, but it was meant to teach the human beings a lesson. What are we getting from it? It tells us a lot about what the authorities believed about animal agency and consciousness. That's exactly what it says. So B is the answer.